morning, students. Today I am going to discuss the infection process and what are the consequences after infection, as well as the various other parameters on which a infection process is basically dependent. So the infection process, the infectious disease. So the infection process basically involves various steps. To the host, infection is best an annoyance, and at worst if the microorganism succeeds. And to microorganism, to microorganism, the infection is focused on finding a suitable environment, obtaining nutrients, and avoiding host immune responses to establish a niche. So the microorganisms, and two micro basically use various types of strategies to survive the host defense mechanisms. So before a microorganism can cause a disease in human being, it must first contact it. Okay, it must first contact it. Okay, and pathogens basically come from a source or the location from which the pathogen is immediately transmitted to the host, either directly through the environment or indirectly through the through an intermediate agent. The sources can be either animals or human beings or maybe food, water, etc. Okay, so the period of infectivity is the time during which the source, such as human beings or contaminated water, is disseminating the pathogen. And if the source of infection can be eliminated or controlled by treating the human or disinfecting the contaminated water, the infectious disease cycle itself will be interrupted, and also the transmission of the pathogen can be also prevented. Okay, so now comes another term, a reservoir. Okay, you all know a reservoir is the natural environment location in which pathogen usually resides. Okay, and it is also the site from which the source acquires the pathogen, or where the direct infection of the host can also occur. Sometimes the reservoirs can also function as a source. Okay, and reservoirs can basically animate or inanimate also. Okay, for example, in the case which includes birds. Okay, in the case of West Nile virus, birds serve as a reservoir for West Nile virus, and the contaminated drinking water is a reservoir for the various pathogens such as Vibrio cholerae, Salmonella, etc. Okay, So the increasing the increasing impingement of the humans on the environment basically can be increased by the exposure to the antibiotics, okay, and sometimes various other antimicrobial substances which are naturally present, okay, in the food. So the infectious diseases, as we have studied in the last lectures, diseases that can be transmitted from the animals to the humans are basically termed as zoonoses, where animals serve as reservoirs. In addition to this, there are also arthropod vectors, which we have discussed in the last lectures. Okay, so in order for the organism to cause a disease, okay, the first basic function to get in the contact is to get in the contact with the host, okay, and to survive microorganism basically needs suitable environment also in the host, okay. There are various some of the factors which can have effect on the organism as well, okay. So basically, to recall some of the basic properties of microbes which they need, such as they need a proper temperature, even pH, moisture, oxygen concentration, variety of nutrients, okay, so that they can grow and reproduce. Okay, so thus for any of the pathogen to survive in its human host, the host must provide conditions that fall within these values. That basically falls within these of the parameters. Okay. So when a pathogen is introduced to the human host, it needs to adapt to the realities of its new environment and to meet its metabolic and physiological needs. And one of those realities is that the microorganisms must compete with the cells of eukaryotic host. Okay, why? Because our human body will start or will activate our immune systems against these pathogens. And one of the realities is that, okay, a successful pathogen will outcompete host cells and evade immune system through use of various virulent factors which are present in a pathogen, okay, which are present in a pathogen. So the survival of the microorganism in the host also depends heavily on its ability to find shelter, okay, and some organisms survive and replicate inside of the host cells. In some cases they reside in very cells that are supposed to destroy them, okay. For example, in the case of phagocytosis, okay, and other organisms attach to and between the host cells and make capsules, burrow under the mucus, secrete exopolysaccharides to form communal shelters within the biofilms, okay. So some microorganisms can produce enzymes that can inactivate innate resistance systems. Still, other organisms have evolved specialized protein secretions to selectively kill host cells, okay. And this physical and chemical characteristics basically reflects microbial virulence, and they also facilitate the microbial survival, okay. So they may produce toxins which are specific to a cell, okay. So the diagram given here, okay. Now the infection starts with the entry portal, okay, with the entry of the organism, okay. Now as they enter, okay, they need to adhere with the host, okay, adhere to attach with the host. Okay, and what are the survival strategies by the pathogens? They may produce adjacents, enzymes, toxins, invasins, or auto inducers. These are the strategies of the microbe, okay, which is a pathogen. Okay, and this also decides the virulence power of a particular pathogen. Okay, now moving forward, and next part is to find and establish a safe environment. Okay, why? So that they can establish there, okay, they can grow there and also absorb nutrients from the surrounding environments. Okay, next comes the acquisition of nutrients. Okay, next comes the acquisition of nutrients. They may produce hemolysins, proteins, or proteases. Okay, and moving further, if again they can outcompete the cells, okay, they are going to establish a niche. Okay, they are going to establish a niche. Okay, if any of the these of the factors, various of the factors which are produced by the microorganisms fail to produce, okay, or any of the host defense mechanism which is more powerful than these factors, can lead to the death of the pathogen, can lead to the death of the pathogen. Okay, and finally there will be exit portal also at the end of the disease. Okay, sometimes it kills the host, sometimes it gets exit directly from the host without killing the host also. It depends on the or on the pathogen. Okay, so what is the course of an infectious disease? Okay, which are the basically stages of the any of the infectious diseases? The first stage is incubation, the second stage is prodromal, the third stage is the illness, fourth stage is the decline stage, and the fifth stage is the convalescence stage. The fifth stage is the convalescence stage. Okay, so what do you mean by the incubation stage? Okay, this time denotes the time travel between the entry of the infective agent and the onset of clinical manifestations of a disease. During this period, the infective agent, after reaching the selective tissue, undergoes a multiplication. Simply, if you want to write incubation period, okay, of a disease, it's basically time interval between entry and the onset of clinical manifestations. Okay, simply, if you want to write in a simple words, it is a time, okay, which is basically a interval when a pathogen enters a host, okay, until it develops symptoms or signs of a particular disease, and basically it is known as incubation period. Okay, so incubation period can be different with different types of diseases. Some may have very short incubation period, some may have very lengthy incubation period also. Okay, so next comes the prodromal period. It is the time during which a non-specific symptoms of a disease occur. Okay, it is the time during which only non-specific symptoms. For example, when we are discussing about a disease, and whose one of the most important or main symptom is diarrhea. Okay, and once the pathogen enters the body, okay, and after some period of time, after the incubation period, it will start showing some of the symptoms. For example, right now we are discussing that one of the main symptom of the disease is diarrhea. Okay, so after the incubation period, There comes a prodromal period in which there may be another symptoms such as some nausea, it may be nausea also, okay, it may be fever also, okay, or it may be various other factors also, various other signs and symptoms which appear before the symptoms, main symptoms of the disease appear. It's called as prodromal period. It is called as prodromal period. Okay, next comes the illness. Okay, next comes the illness. When the disease is most severe, when it shows basically maximum signs and symptoms of a disease simply, okay, and the host immune system is typically triggered, okay, host immune system will be highly active at this stage of the disease, okay. So illness basically defines a point of a or a period of a disease where there are maximum number of signs and symptoms of a particular disease. At this point, the host system is basically in a triggered stage. Okay. The next and the last one is in convalescence stage. Convalescence stage. During this period, basically it's a period of decline. Now symptoms and signs basically now starts to disappear, okay, basically starts to disappear, okay, and the recovery stage of the disease is often referred to as convalescence stage, okay. Convalescence stage is basically a recovery stage of a disease, okay. So now moving forward with the course of an infection of a disease in a graphical period, okay. So this one is an intensity of the symptoms and the time period from the exposure to microbe, okay. Now here comes the first comes the incubation period, okay, where there are no signs or symptoms which are produced. The prodromal period, some of the signs or symptoms may produce, okay, unless the maximum number of signs and symptoms of a particular disease will be developed, okay, till a particular point, and this stage basically indicates illness. This stage basically indicates illness, and as host defense systems are also working, okay, if they are not working properly, then it may lead to death also, okay. It may also lead to death if the host immune systems are not working properly or due to any other reasons also, okay. And finally, if the host immune system is working properly, okay, the graph will basically stabilize, and finally the last stage, which is an convalescent stage, okay, signs and symptom will start to disappear. Signs and symptom will start to disappear, okay. So the course of an infection of infectious disease, the most infectious diseases occur in 4 stages. The duration of each stage is a characteristic feature of each disease. The shaded area represents many diseases are communicable, and should the host be unable to overcome illness and death results, okay, host must be able to overcome illness, okay. So now moving forward again with different cases of scenarios of a latent infection, chronic infection, and the acute infection and the acute infection. So in the case of an acute infection, this is a very short period of infection, incubation period, okay, there will be illness period, okay, there will be no prodromal period in this case, okay, but it may appear for a short period of time, uh, very short period of time, and finally convalescent stage, okay, at which the disease starts to signs and symptoms of the disease starts to disappear, okay. And in this case, organism disappears after illness, and usually immunity to reinfection exists, okay. If there is any chances of the reinfection, okay, immunity will be provided by the body. Now comes the chronic period, okay, where the duration of the disease It's very long. Okay, there will be incubation period, also prodromal period, but it is not given in this graph. Okay, illness persists for a very long time. Okay, illness persists for a very longer time, and if remain untreated for a more number of time, or if there are no medications used or any other preventive or third or any other measures used, it may persist for a very long time and even finally may lead to death of a host. Okay, and in the case of a latent infection, incubation period, prodromal period, illness, convalescence. Okay, but the pathogen still remains in the host, but in the inactive state, and this state is basically called as latent period. This stage of inactive state of an pathogen is called as latent period. Okay, and after few months or years, when the immunity of the host weakens, okay, the illness may occur. Okay, illness may occur. So finally, just going to ask you a question. Okay, will a disease result from an encounter between a human and then microorganisms? Okay, where human is a host and microorganism, any it may be bacteria, it may be fungi, or it may be virus, okay, or it may be a protozoa also. There are a variety of conditions. Okay, I have only included some of the parameters. Okay, only 6 parameters, 3 from the microbe, which is a pathogen here, and the host, okay, which is in case it's an human being. Okay, each and every point should be correct in order to cause or to develop infection. Okay, so when we discuss about this period, the first point is virulence. The second parameter is the percentage of optimal infectious dose. The third point is the correct portal of entry. Then from the host, it's a genetic profile that resists the microbe X, basically non-specific defenses. Is there any previous exposure to microbe X? Is there is any exposure, and general health condition of the body. Okay, so basically in this diagram, okay, the first scenario of a virulence, okay, the virulence of microbe is basically very low. Okay, as you all know, the low virulence, okay, decreases the pathogenicity of a particular microbe. Okay, decreases the pathogenicity of a particular microbe, and infectious dose percentage of optimal is also low in this case. So it may have a high infection rate, but the problem comes next one. Does the pathogen enter from a correct portal of entry? As I told you when we were discussing the portal of entry, that each and every specific pathogen needs a proper portal of entry to cause an infection. Okay, they are basically specific to a particular part of the human body. So in this case, the correct portal of entry, it is not going to enter from a correct portal of entry. Okay, now comes the in the case of a host profile, genetic one. Okay, is the genetic profile that resists the microbe X? Yes, genetic profile basically resists the microbe X. Okay, so to how much level? Almost you can say at a higher level it can resist. Is there any previous exposure of microbe X? Yes, there was a previous exposure of the same microbe X. Okay, where X can be any of the microbe, any of the pathogen. Is there? Yes, there was a previous exposure. Okay, and what is the general level of the health of the human? Yes, it is in a good condition. It is in a good condition. Now, what are the chances of a disease? Okay, or what are the chances, or will there be any disease or not? No, there will not be a disease. Okay, even the microbe would not even be able, would not be even able to infect also, to adhere properly also. Okay, so finally, what will be the outcomes here? What will be the outcomes? Microbe passes through unnoticed. Okay, it will not get noticed properly. Okay, or maybe even killed by the human immune system. Okay, now moving with the second scenario. Okay, with the second scenario, again the same parameters: virulence, optimal dose, portal of entry, genetic profile, previous exposure, and general health. Okay, now comes the virulence power. Okay, now comes the virulence power. Yes, virulence power is high, percentage of dose required is high. Does the pathogen enter from the correct portal of entry? Yes. Okay, yes. Does the host have a generic profile that resist microbe X? Yes. Okay, it is a very it is a, again it's at higher level. Okay, now is there any previous exposure to microbe X? Yes, there was a exposure. And what will be general health? What is the general health level of a host? Yes, it is in a very good condition. Okay, so even if the virulence power is high, optimal dose is high, portal of entry is also correct, but in this scenario, host defense mechanisms will kill the microbe, will kill the microbe, will kill the basically a pathogen. Okay, so again in this case, microbe passes through unnoticed, or even if it becomes established, even if it is able to adhere. Okay, but it will not be able, it will not be able to produce any of the signs or symptoms. Okay, it will, or it will not be able to colonize the host also. Okay, so now comes the next scenario. Okay, virulence again, optimal dose, portal of entry, genetic profile, previous exposure to microbe X, and the general health level. In this case, virulence again it's high. Optimal dose, it is a very low level. Okay, percentage is very low. Okay, portal of correct entry, no, it will not enter at a proper point. Genetic profile, yes, it resists the disease, it is going to resist the disease. Okay, is there any previous exposure? No, there was no previous exposure, but in this case again the pathogen will not be able to cause disease. Okay, and in this case genetic profile also resist the disease, and as the immunity level is very good, it may also resist the disease. So in this case again the same outcome, microbe passes through unnoticed, or microbe becomes established without the disease. Okay, so now the last scenario, when can microbe cause a disease? When can it? Okay, when can the microbe cause disease? When virulence is high, percentage of optimal infectious dose is high, portal of entry is correct, genetic profile do not resist the pathogen, there was no previous exposure to the microbe, to the pathogen, and also the general health level is very low. Okay, so in the case of microbe X, all the parameters given, all the three parameters are at a very good condition. Okay, for example, virulence is high, percentage of optimal dose is again high, portal of entry, yes, it has entered through a correct portal of entry. Okay, and genetic profile in the case of host, no, it does not provide any natural resistance. Okay, and the previous exposure to microbe X is also not there. But again, one of the negative point in the case of a host, the general health level is basically low right now. General health level of the pathogen is basically low. Okay, so there are higher chances for a pathogen to cause a disease. So final outcome will be microbe causes disease. So the final outcome, the microbe causes disease. Okay, so now moving forward with the next one. So which are the steps involved when a microbe causes disease? Okay, which are the steps involved? Okay, when microbe causes disease in a host. So the first point is to find a correct portal of entry. So the first point is to find a correct portal of entry. Okay, and the portal of entry basically depends on the type of pathogen. It basically depends on the type of pathogen. Okay, and some case it may be skin, some case it may be gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, urinogenital tract, or even in the case of endogenous biota. Okay, so now the second stage will be adherence or attaching. Okay, or attaching to the host. Okay, so in this case, fimbriae, capsules, surface proteins, and viral spikes in the case of viruses. In the case of a viruses, basically help to adhere the pathogen to the host. Okay, after it has gained entry into the host, okay, it will need surviving mechanisms against the host. So now comes the surviving the host defenses. Now comes the surviving the host defenses. Okay, it can be done by avoiding phagocytosis. Okay, to prevent phagocytosis. Okay, avoiding death inside the phagocyte. Okay, or the absence of the specific immunity, or the absence of a specific immunity. Okay, so finally once it had survived the host defenses, okay, now it is going to start cause damage to the human beings. Now it is going to start causing damage to the human beings. Okay, basically which involves direct damage via enzymes or toxins, inducing excessive host response, causing the epigenetic changes in the host chromosomes. Okay, so it may do it by enzymes or toxins, by inducing excessive host response also, and sometimes epigenetic changes in the host chromosomes. And finally, in order to infect other individuals, it needs to exit from the host. Okay, it needs to exit from the host. So final stage will be exiting the host. In this case, portals of exit such as respiratory tract, salivary glands, skin cells, fecal matter, urinogenital tract, and blood may be the exit points of a particular pathogen. Okay, it may differ with a different type of pathogens. Okay, so finally, just for your revision, okay, just for your revision, in any of the disease, okay, Koch postulates are basically the 4 rules of any disease. Okay, Koch postulates are one of the 4 rules, okay, of any disease to prove that this organism is responsible for a particular disease. Okay, so the first point, which includes the microorganism, just for your revision, okay, I know you have studied in your semester 1, okay, a microorganism must be identified in all the individuals affected by the disease, but the same microbe should not be present in the healthy individuals. Okay, the first point is basically the microorganism which is causing a disease must be present only in the case of an individual which have a disease, but this microbe should not be present in the healthy individual. Okay, now the second point is basically the microorganisms can be isolated from the diseased individual and must be grown in a culture, must be grown in a culture. For example, if you have a typhoid, you know that it is caused by salmonella. We must be able to isolate salmonella in the case of a person who is suffering from a typhoid, okay, and also grow in the laboratory. But in all cases, culturing is not possible, okay, and if culturing is possible, we may need to use a specialized growth conditions also nowadays. Okay, now comes the third point. When introduced into a healthy individual, the cultured organism should be able to cause disease. Now the same microbe which is being isolated from a diseased individual, when is introduced to a healthy individual or inoculated in a healthy individual, okay, this microorganism should cause the same disease, should cause the same disease. Okay, now comes the fourth point of the Koch postulates. The microorganisms must be re-isolated from the experimental host and found to be identical to the original microorganism. Okay, once we have infected or introduced the pathogen into a healthy individual, and this same microorganisms should be present in the particular host and must be again re-isolated from the host. Okay, must be again re-isolated from the given host, okay, and should be identical to the original microorganism which we had cultured, okay, which we had cultured. Okay, now I'm going to end the lecture now. Okay, we will continue with our the next points, okay, in the next lecture. So please join the WebEx session. Okay, please join the WebEx session and comment present, sir, for your attendance.